Alright, hey everyone, Ryan here. I am making YouTube videos. Alright, now you can probably tell, of course, that this is a different video. Normally, this will be Morgs doing a cringy face and not Winston Churchill doing a weird face. He's probably had too much brandy. Fucking alcoholic. Imagine being an alcoholic. Never be me. Definitely not me. I definitely don't drink cider any time that I can. Nope, not me. Alright, so now we're going to be watching a specific video called What If Britain Made Peace with the Nazis? Don't think I can say that. With those people that I'm going to have to blur out, unfortunately. Mussolini suffered from a disease called thinking their army was good. Lamau. Pretty much, what if Britain was a bitch and gave up?
I saw the movie Darkest Hour. It's about how Winston Churchill made the tough decisions he did about keeping Britain in the war when it looked like the Germans were winning, namely in the spring and summer of 1940. It was good and I recommend you watch it, but it got me thinking about what if Britain had made the other decision? What if Britain had made peace with the Nazis, thus ending World War II in the West? It was late spring of 1940. The Germans had just conquered France and were on the footsteps of Britain itself. They almost wiped out the British army at Dunkirk, which was only miraculously evacuated from the beachheads. In the next few months, the Germans would launch a crippling airstrike on Britain and try to starve it out with...
Look at this. So we got France, they gave up because they're a little bitch. We got Germany here. We got Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway under German control. Then we got Britain, got the British with their cups of tea, safe over here.
with a submarine campaign. In our
Also, since when did they occupy Iceland?
timeline, Churchill led Britain against the full might of Nazi Germany for more than a year, surviving until other nations, namely the Russians and Americans, could come to Britain's aid. This didn't have to happen.
Although, I do wonder, like, the second that if... Although I have a alternate video in mind, like, that is alternate history, because, like, this is the thing I find interesting. And if you have a problem with it, fine, just go watch someone else. Yeah, I'll leave a link to this video. Yeah, this will be a fun comment section. Remember, you're all human and love your children. Ew. Simp. Ew. I can't even say that anymore. Because I'm coming down with a disease called simping for someone.
Peace hawks were endemic in the British government. Lord Halifax, who declared
Excuse me? The Great British? The British? We're talking about giving up. No, that is a French thing. No, I do not consent. Nope. Nope, how dare this man? Look at this man. Hold up. How do they look? They are brothers. That is father and son right there.
the position of Prime Minister, wanted a peace with Germany, and many in Britain lost the will to fight. They thought a defeat of Nazi Germany impossible, and
This goes down saying, karma is a bitch. Remember that.
so why shouldn't Britain just cut its losses now? This timeline could happen in many different ways.
Right. These, I do not remember the British being French.
Halifax could accept
Wait, that's the
power and make
Franco-British
the
Union.
peace treaty, or the Germans don't stop in front of Dunkirk and wipe out the British army, perhaps turning favor for peace in Britain. Maybe Churchill just has less will to fight and caves in. It really doesn't matter since they would all have the same result. The treaty would actually look something...
Look at this. Look at this. So we've got Germany, right, over here with all of Europe. Then we've got the British, right, that is approximately about that's about probably the size of Canada, maybe. Around Canada and US sort of size, with British control. But like that's Vichy France, which is a German ally, despite they're not really friends because like they got their ass kicked and gave up. Which is why I bully French people. There's a camera in my microphone. Why? But like, this is all pointless because... So we got like Egypt, right? But then we got Italy, which I like to call the incompetent fuckboy. because they were incompetent. They couldn't do anything. Although if Spain would have got involved, then this area here was their lake. And what they'd have to do is get submarine to go all the way around here. Like that's just a kamikaze run.
Something like this, with recognition of Vichy France, Germany's French puppet state, and its control of its colonies. The British would also likely return the colonies they took from Germany during World War I, namely Tanzania and Namibia. Hitler
I honestly would like to see a Cold War video. I've seen part one of when it goes to war, but I would like to see this sort of setup.
really didn't care about Africa, since he thought the temperature was unhealthy for the Aryan master race, but also
Hashtag racist.
thought it was important for Germany's national glory to regain the colonies. Besides this, the treaty
I swear I've watched this. I swear this sort of thing I have watched.
wouldn't be too evil. Hitler wanted Britain as a fellow Aryan nation.
I swear I've watched this. Oh yeah, World War III, I think, aren't I?
To be an ally of Germany, since
Brrr.
in his view, only if the Aryan peoples stood together could they defeat the forces of communism, Judeo-Marxism, blacks, and the laundry list of other peoples Hitler hated. He wouldn't want to embitter Britain, and so would not have made them crippled. There were some who wanted the Italians, led by Mussolini, to mediate the peace treaty between Britain and Germany. Since Mussolini was seen as more reasonable than Hitler,
Mussolini was incompetent. Look at this man. That is the face that you make when you know and everyone else knows you're a little bitch.
and would make the terms easier. This would likely not actually happen. Mussolini wanted Egypt, Sudan, the Levant, Crete, and Cyprus in exchange for mediating said treaty, and even so, it wouldn't be seen as a given. Considering that Hitler wanted peace with Britain so he could focus on what he saw as the greater struggle, that against Russia, making a treaty straight with the Nazis wouldn't be too hard. Even with the Germans pulling out of the war with Britain, the Italians would keep fighting. Mussolini suffered from the disease of believing his armies were good.
Oh no, I cannot take that straight. Italy thinking they're good. It reminds me like a Fortnite kid who thinks that they're going to be the next big pro or whatever.
In reality, they were terrible, and so he would likely think that he could knit Britain's colonies like Egypt, Sudan, and the Levant. However, in reality, the Italian army was so terrible that they would quickly be defeated. In our timeline, the only thing that kept the Italians going in North Africa were the puny German Africa Corps. Without that,
And that is the thing, the Italians weren't even ready to go to war. Like, they should not have gone to war, no matter what. The economic situation wasn't good enough. They weren't ready until 1942 or whatever. They went into a war early, and they paid the price for it, because they got drop kicked. They just straight got drop kicked.
they would be trounced. The Italians would sign a peace treaty with Britain, which would not be too humiliating, with the Germans amusedly keeping the Italians from failing too badly. The Germans would still invade Russia in this timeline, which is arguably the whole point of the European front in World War II, and Hitler.
You know what you could have just done? Right. Now, if he wanted to invade, right, this video is just gonna get cancelled, like demonetization everywhere. Right, what's gonna happen is this video specifically, I think is a good idea, but with specifics in Russia v US, yes, Russia versus USSR, yes, that'd be a civil war. Germany against the Soviets would be ending up, I want to say the Soviets would win, but it'll be a stalemate because Russia has something called winter, and the Germans
Hitler's whole
have an
goal.
aggressive voice.
Without Crete and Greece, in which the British forced the Germans to invade the Balkans, the plan would likely take place a week or so earlier. However, the mud was especially bad in Russia that spring, thus negating most of the advantage. Initially, the invasion would go much the same, with the Germans being initially successful. I'm going to talk about something that the history books try not to cover because it doesn't line up with our current view of history. The British, especially the conservatives that dominated the government, really hated the Soviets in World War II. This is partially because the conservative...
But like, you're okay. Imagine this, right? You're a midget island, right? You are a tiny island, and you're fighting. Okay, 348. Okay, I'm gonna remember that. Right, where's a map? Okay, now here's your situation. Right, there's you. Yep, there's you, Tiny. There's your enemy. He's kicked your mate's ass. He has a mate down south. He's kicked you up over there. So literally, they could just go, okay, lads, here's what we're gonna do, right? Sail, sail, sail. Here's the thing, because the Germans, here's the thing, the Germans were the French, because 1812 is when. Because the Germans had the better army, but the British were better on land. No, not on land, on like sea. Like, if German army versus British army in that time would be, probably the Germans would win because they had a larger population because of the German mother squad, or I don't even know what it's called. So German, I don't know. Pretty much they had a breeding program. And what that ended up doing was it ended up with a lot more population, which is why UK and France have only about 60 or so million, but Germany has 80. Or at least that's a particular reason why I think, but I don't know, I'm just a dumbass with the channel and I bully people.
Hitler hated. He wouldn't want to embitter Britain. He hated the Soviets in World War II.
That is because of the fact that Britain and the United States of America, PP, Eagle, Squawk, Freedom Sounds, was scared of communism, but the US was the only one who could actually do something about it, which is why there was no posh 20-foot hats in the Vietnamese in the trees.
This is partially because the conservative Tory party was dominated by noble landowners who really hated the idea of a working lower-class revolution. But
they're just posh. It is just posh accents.
This meant that there was huge clamoring in our timeline for a declaration of war on the Soviets when the Russians invaded Finland, even though Britain was currently at war with the Third Reich, and there was no conceivable way to even reach Finland. The invasion of Norway was even partially done so the British could fight their way across Scandinavia and help Finland, declaring war on the Soviet Union. The British made war plans to bomb the Russian oil facilities in the Caucasus, based out of their colonies in the Middle East. This is kind of disturbing, but it's the truth. Britain almost declared war on the Soviet Union several times in World War II. This would mean that if it looked like the Nazis were winning in Russia, as it did for much of 42 and 41, the British might have helped the Nazis out and declared war on the Soviet Union, since it would look like a Nazi victory was already going to happen. So why not? Also, remember at this time, no one knew how evil the Nazis really were.
How? They are literally murdering people just because of the mother line, as I'm gonna call it. Like, if you are right, let's say your mum's Jewish, right? Let's just say that, but your dad's not. Now, you are born. If you're born down the mother's line, if it's your mum's mum, then your mum, then it'll be you. And for every child that you have, it just keeps on going down like that. So
the Holocaust had barely started, and the Nazis kept an airtight seal on what was going on behind their walls. Many Brits might have honestly been more sympathetic to the Nazis than the Soviets, one being a fellow Germanic Protestant people like them.
Oh yeah, that is true. Anglo-Saxons.
Them, fighting to bring civilization to godless communist Slavs. The British likely used their navy to land on the northern coast of Russia, along the ports of Archangel and Murmansk. Let's say this is June of 1942, at the same time as the major German offensive that was supposed to break the back of Russia. This would be accompanied by attacks from British-occupied Iran and Iraq across Soviet-occupied...
I like how America's closest ally once controlled one of America's most hated countries. I find that funny.
North Iran into the Caucasus. These would include bombing of the oil facilities that gave Russia oil from the Caucasus. The Russians, busy trying to protect their actually important provinces in the west, would let these attacks pass, thus giving the British the relatively useless regions like Archangel and Murmansk. The British would likely be able to seize northern Iran, but become bogged down in the Soviet-occupied mountains of Azerbaijan. I see no evidence that the British military had the tactical and strategic skill to fight a mountain war against the Russians. Someone should make a meme about this. It's just begging to happen.
Bruh.
The war in the Pacific would still take place, with the Japanese still needing oil and thus still bombing Pearl Harbor and invading the South Pacific. This would still draw the US into the Pacific War against Japan. This would also bring Japan into war with Britain. The Germans would value their alliance with the British more than that with the Japanese, because one was helping them conquer Russia. The Germans would officially be at war with the Japanese, but with no colonies in the region, and no way to get there would do nothing. With Hitler not being a Japanese ally, he never would have declared war on America. Also, with Britain being a Nazi ally, the US wouldn't have had any stake in Europe. This would mean that the US never would have gotten involved in the European war. Without US aid, without the Allied bombing campaign that weakened German industry, and having to fight a war against the British, would mean that the Russians would lose World War II. With the British attacking from the south and the Nazis from the west, the Russians would lose control of the Caucasus, and pull back to the Volga River. This would give the Nazis the Caucasian oil and Ukrainian food that could keep them fighting forever. Knowing they couldn't hold the Caucasus, the Russians would never have made a stand at Stalingrad, instead saving those men for later. This would never have broken the back of the Nazi army, meaning that they would continue to attack forward. The Nazi summer offensive of 1943 would be another attack on Moscow. With Russia such a shambles, the Nazis would probably win, although
so the German border was here. Remember when Napoleon did that?
I'd be willing to argue for a narrow Russian victory. What is probably likely is that the war would drag on for an insanely long time. The Nazis would want all of European Russia so that they could fulfill their horrifying racial colonist fantasies. But the sheer size of Russia and tenacity of the Russian people would prevent this from actually happening, but the Russians would be too crippled to retake the lands they lost, however. The British would probably drop out fairly quickly, achieving their goals and likely getting Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran as token colonies for their service. The war with the Nazis would likely drag on until around 1950, with Hitler settling for taking the heart of European Russia, with a line stretching from Kazakhstan to the White Sea. With the Russians so clearly losing the war, the Japanese would attack and seize the far eastern province of Russia on a whim. Since the Russians would be so preoccupied with surviving in the west and the far east is so cut off from the rest of Russia, they would succeed. The Americans would defeat the Japanese in the Pacific, just like our timeline. With Russia too weak to support communist movements, the entire Japanese empire and nations like China, Indonesia, North Korea, and even eastern Siberia would fall into the US sphere of power, with the only exceptions being the old British colonies like Burma and Malaysia. The war against Russia would be much cheaper than our timeline's wholesale reconquest of Western Europe for the British, meaning they wouldn't have left the war completely wiped out. This would result in the British Empire likely surviving. Britain would likely be a mediator between the US and Nazi Germany, sharing a language and culture with one, and geographic proximity in a war with the other. The US and Germany, being the two most powerful nations left on Earth, would be rivals, maybe not to a Cold War extent, since neither would really have borders, but rivals nonetheless. The surviving bit of Russia, between the Volga and the American puppet East Siberia, without a coast having been horribly betrayed, would turn out on itself and basically become a massive North Korea, a hugely xenophobic nation with an enormous military and an oppressive totalitarian communist regime. Sorry for making such a grim timeline this time, guys.
This video I personally find interesting because but like in this video, right, in this fucking video, mate, is the fact that if Britain had made peace and they'd end up still fighting, except they'd end up starting to suck Germany's dick. There we go, I can English. Right. So, Okay, that's 20 minutes of me watching a 10-minute video. Okay, I'm gonna leave now. Bye.